here, and today we'll find out, can you beat Morrowind with only poison damage? I suspect this run would have won the last poll a few weeks ago if I hadn't inadvertently divided the Elder Scrolls fans by offering this and an Oblivion Remastered run in the same poll. We've beaten Oblivion with only poison, mostly successfully, although I didn't know there were 0 damage training weapons in Battlehorn Castle, and used a rusty dagger as a poisoned vehicle instead, marring the run a smidge. Poison works very differently in Morrowind, but first, the rules. We can only deal poison damage. Non-damaging effects such as weakness to poison or healing are allowed, but damage from summons is not. Sunder, Keening, and Wraithguard can be used, but only on the heart. We must complete the main quest the intended way. No cheats or gameplay mods. Official DLC is allowed. I'm using OpenMW, but it's set to mimic classic Morrowind with a few improvements to NPC pathfinding, as well as patch for Purists and Expansion Delay. The rest are graphics mods and are listed in the description. Before we go any further, I'd like to take a moment to thank our channel members. In the You Broke the Tip Jar tier, we have Ginger Knight and Ugu the Monk. In the bigger tip jar tier, we have K Plays Music and Games, Blackwood, Ying, and David Bliss. And finally, in the tip jar tier, we have Bwezu, Ragnarok, Ace of Kestrels, Jack1165, Narugility, Zachary, Thomas Quack, and Kenny379. Thank you all for your support. Ad revenue is unpredictable at best, so you all give this channel some financial stability and encourage me to do more runs. One last thing before we get to the fun part. I've challenge run a few games YouTube doesn't seem to know what to do with, like Battletech, Kinshi, and Enchanted Arms, so I'm making sure you all know they exist by blathering about them. If you aren't interested, no pressure, but if you are, there's a playlist with all my challenges linked in the description for your convenience. Now on with the run. Just Background Noise has done many Morrowind runs, including a poison-only one, and I highly recommend his channel if you've somehow stumbled across me and not him. I've watched the start of his poison-only run so I could see the rules, and I'm mirroring them. Except for the max difficulty, as I find damage sponges boring, we're on normal. Feel free to boost my engagement by grumbling about it in the comments. I might put in mods like Beware the Sixth House in future runs to make enemies tougher in more varied ways, like giving them new spells, resistances, or health regen, if there's an interest. Let me know in the comments, and feel free to suggest mods. I have no idea how Just Background Noise's run went. I plan to watch it later, but I'm hoping my comparative cluelessness will cause differences. Unlike Skyrim and Oblivion, alchemical poisons can't be applied to weapons in Morrowind, so destruction magic is our sole source of poison. The wiki calls poison the least useful of the magical damage types because many enemies are resistant or immune to it, and restoration has a cure poison effect while fire, frost, shock, and raw magic damage have no cure. Great! I considered the serpent birth sign. It'd be the most fitting from a roleplay perspective, and unlike Oblivion, the damage it inflicts on enemies is poison. However, it also causes magic self-damage, so it's off limits. I suspect Bethesda did that so Redguards and Argonians wouldn't be resistant or immune to the self-damage, respectively, because every time Argonians have a chance to be good at something, Bethesda takes it away, and usually gives it to Bretons. That leaves Mage or Apprentice to boost our magicka, or Lady to raise endurance and thus our health. As much as I'd like health, I think we'll need magicka more. The Apprentice gives us 3 times the magicka as the Mage at the cost of a 50% weakness to magic. In addition to the weakness only being half of what it is in Oblivion, weakness to magic is less crippling in Morrowind as it doesn't apply to harmful magic universally. In fact, it only amplifies a handful of effects: non-elemental damage, drain, absorb, blind, burden, sound, and silence. The most worrying are damage or absorb health, which according to the wiki few enemies use. Vampires are notable exceptions, but they're rarer in Morrowind than Oblivion or Skyrim. We aren't likely to encounter any if we mostly stick to the main quest. We can also counter the weakness to magic by playing a Breton, which also boosts magicka further. There's an argument to be made for High Elf for even more magicka and a destruction bonus, but I'd rather avoid elemental weaknesses. For our class, we specialize in magic and pick destruction as a major skill to boost our chance of casting poison and weakness to poison spells, as well as restoration, alteration, and mysticism for healing and utility. We take heavy armor for our final major. We're unlikely to complete the scavenger hunt for Daedric armor, but heavy armor is governed by endurance, which will help us raise our health. On that note, we'll need to raise an intelligence-governed skill to raise our magicka, and unlike Oblivion, mysticism raises willpower. However, it's easier to get +5s for attributes each level by raising miscellaneous skills, so there's an argument for leaving intelligence skills miscellaneous. It's not necessary to break out the spreadsheet and micromanage skill increases to have a functional character. I've proven this in Oblivion many times, but it certainly messes with perfectionists, myself included. Conjuration raises intelligence, but we can't use it in combat, so we'd have to grind it with the captivating stand-in-a-corner casting spells method. Security is another option, but alteration and mysticism already allow us to open locks and disarm traps from a safe distance with open and telekinesis. That leaves enchant and alchemy. To be clear, I know either of these skills, or Divines Forbid, both in tandem, can shatter this game. However, I'll be avoiding things like Fortify loops unless they're needed. Enchant and alchemy may still be useful without cheese if we need restorative potions or enchanted items, so we pick them as minor skills despite my likely unfounded worries over losing intelligence points. If we really need to gain intelligence without leveling, security and conjuration are there, and medium armor gives us an option for endurance. We throw in armor, athletics, and acrobatics for repairs and movement. Alteration is the king of mobility in Morrowind, but moving faster and jumping further without magic will come in handy while traveling. Intelligence and endurance are key since they directly affect our health and magicka, but what about other attributes? Willpower is mildly important for our casting chance. The relevant skill is more impactful. And unlike Oblivion, which had a loading screen tip that implied but didn't implement a willpower magic resistance connection, willpower actually helps us resist paralyze and silence in Morrowind. I'd still say it's less valuable than in Oblivion, as real-time magicka regen doesn't exist without mods, so I'm not worried about grinding it. Luck has some use. It affects our casting, alchemy, and enchanting, albeit less than skill, willpower, or intelligence. It's difficult to raise as it governs no skills, so we'll favor it to get 10 points out the gate. Strength affects our carrying capacity and determines our starting health, but has no effect on health after character creation. Agility is very important for martial characters as it affects the chance to hit with all physical attacks, but for us it only affects dodging and knockdowns. Strength and agility also raise stamina. Stamina has a more profound effect in Morrowind than later games, affecting everything from casting chance to crafting, but since we aren't physically attacking, we should be okay without strength or agility. Speed is nice, but not crucial. We'll raise it or luck if our prioritized attributes didn't get many skill increases during a level. Personality is, as usual, at the bottom of the pile. While it's more useful than in Oblivion, talk about low bars, magic, speechcraft, or items like Telvanni Bug Musk are more than enough to accomplish any tasks relevant to personality. Apparently, it can be useful all the way back in Daggerfall thanks to the linguistics skills. Check out Ragnarok's channel for more on that. But frankly, it feels vestigial at best in the later games. To sum up that ramble for the people who skipped it, we're playing a Breton born under the Apprentice with a custom class specialized in magic that favors luck and endurance and has destruction, alteration, restoration, mysticism, and heavy armor as major skills, and alchemy, enchant, acrobatics, athletics, and armorer as minor skills. Our goals are to have lots of magicka and eventually decent health, although we'll be squishy initially thanks to Breton's pitiful base endurance, as well as lots of movement options. With that out of the way, off we go. Our first order of business is getting a poison spell. Picking destruction only gives us fire bite, which is useless. To get new spells, we need gold, so we raid the Census and Excise office for its silverware and take the Silt Strider to Balmora to raid containers around the buildings. We also join the mages and fighters guilds as well as the temple and purchase dire weakness to poison, which according to the wiki is the only way to get weakness to poison for spellcrafting, and poison from Marin Drin and Estirdelin in the Balmora Mages Guild. Yes, the spell is just called poison. I apologize for the inevitable confusion this will introduce to the script, but we should be moving on to custom spells shortly. We don't have a 100% chance to successfully cast poison even at full stamina, so we need to improve some combination of destruction, willpower, and luck. We also purchased summon Ancestor Ghost to grind Conjuration for intelligence. It's allowed as long as it doesn't attack anything. We initially bought a Bound Dagger spell, but grinding Conjuration with Bound Gear is annoying to say the least, as we have to wait for the Bound Gear to time out before we're allowed to cast the spell again. We also buy as much iron and bone mold armor as we can afford to grind medium and heavy armor for endurance. I'm only planning to grind a few levels because it is very boring and almost certainly isn't necessary, but I don't want to be lamenting our pitiful health 20 levels from now. We complete a few Balmora Fighters Guild quests while working on this for gold. Unlike Oblivion, joining a guild doesn't allow us to ransack the guild halls. We can only take a few things from supply chests. And our first level up gets us 5 speed, intelligence, and endurance. Speed was a happy accident. We don't have full armor yet, so we got quite a few unarmored increases, as well as athletics. You can tell I was already bored since level 3 only got 1 luck, 2 intelligence, and 5 endurance. Conjuration doesn't increase nearly as fast as in Oblivion, so the intelligence was from making potions with a Grandmaster Mortar and Pestle we swiped from the Alchemist in Balmora. Thankfully, it's far easier to keep track of attribute increases in Morrowind without mods or external tools. When we hover over our current level, it shows our progress to the next level and attribute multipliers. Why was this taken out of Oblivion? This tiny change makes managing attributes less tedious. It doesn't fix it completely, but it helps more than you'd think. Level 4 gets us 4 speed, 2 intelligence, and 1 luck. We were wandering around picking flowers and accidentally leveled. Level 5 went a bit better with 5 intelligence, 2 endurance, and 1 luck. We've been doing guild quests around Balmora, mostly picking flowers for the Mages Guild. We got paid and took advantage of a spellmaker in the guild to make attribute restoring spells in case we run into bone walkers, as well as more poison spells. Sting is a cheap spell for dealing with vermin or for reliability when we're low on stamina, while Rattlesnake hits harder and inflicts weakness to poison to increase its damage. Sunder Serpent is harder to cast and does less base damage, but inflicts a 100% weakness to poison to bypass poison immunity. Speaking of, weakness works differently in Morrowind compared to later games. In Oblivion, weaknesses don't apply to effects in the same spell. A spell with 10 fire damage and 50% fire weakness will only deal 10 damage regardless of the order the effects are listed in, although it'll deal 15 on subsequent hits provided the weakness hasn't worn off and is listed after the damage. Otherwise, the game resets the weakness timer before the damage happens, and then proceeds to ignore the weakness because it's once again from the same spell as the damage. Weakness to magic, if present, must be listed at the end to reach its full potential. So an ideal Oblivion spell has all other effects, then elemental and poison weaknesses, and finally weakness to magic. Even Bethesda got confused. There are pre-made spells like Chilling Touch from the Spell Tomes DLC that fail to follow this rule, making their weaknesses useless unless the player switches spells. I didn't know this until I found an explanation on Reddit, which I'm preserving in case another moderator loses their mind over the word prince. Morrowind's handling of weaknesses are more intuitive in my opinion. As long as a weakness is listed before a damage effect, the weakness will apply to that damage. The ideal order of effects is reversed, with weaknesses coming first. But if a player misses this detail, the weakness will still apply on following hits if it hasn't worn off. There's also less weakness stacking, as weakness to magic is more limited in scope. However, there's a loophole. If a 1-second weakness is added to a spell, it'll apply to all relevant damage later in the spell, even if that damage happens over, say, 5 seconds. This allows for a lot of cheap damage and is likely why the weaknesses don't apply to effects in the same spell rule was added in Oblivion. I'd prefer weaknesses applied to effects in the same spell, but only as long as their duration lasts. This removes the 1-second weakness exploit without neutering spells that fail to apply effects in the correct order. However, it would require each tick of damage to check weaknesses and resistance. I don't know how that works under the hood. Maybe checking weaknesses each second for every ongoing effect would ruin performance. It's the only reason I can think of for why Bethesda avoided this implementation, but maybe there are others I haven't considered. And then Skyrim came along and threw the baby out with the bathwater, the baby being the whole spellcrafting system. I'm not bitter. We're back on the endurance grind for level 6, and so far the best way I've found has been to swim until we're swarmed by slaughterfish. There's a risk of running into dreg, which we can't tank for long, but we have enough health and armor, a mix of Imperial Dragon Scale, Iron, and Bone Mold, to take it out if we focus on it. Humanoids may attack faster depending on their weapon, and like Oblivion, armor skills gain the same XP per hit regardless of damage, so fast, weak attacks are ideal, but unlike Oblivion, creatures don't damage armor in Morrowind. There's an option in OpenMW to fix this, but I'm taking whatever cheese the game offers if it makes this less annoying. We end up getting 5 endurance and intelligence and 2 strength. We took strength because carrying this armor with only 150 bramble plinths was grating, to put it lightly. Swimming also improves our athletics, and thus our movement speed. Some of you were likely surprised when we picked athletics, as I typically avoid it as a class skill in Oblivion. While it increases movement speed in both games, I don't feel a need to raise it in Oblivion because Oblivion's movement feels fine to me, whereas Morrowind's feels slow as molasses and it has fewer fast travel options. At least until we start getting some intervention spells and just start bebopping around the map that way. It's a shame athletics doesn't improve stamina regen while running like Oblivion, as it'd be a rewarding perk with Morrowind's harsher stamina management. While there are many things I like about Morrowind compared to later Elder Scrolls games, the stamina management, greater attribute and skill influence on gameplay, the bizarre world, and crazy magic to name a few, I miss perks. They add a layer to leveling that makes characters feel more unique. For example, a Destruction Master in Skyrim may specialize in Fire, Frost, or Shock via perks. And don't get me started on how insane its perk trees can get with mods. Anyway, level 7 gets 5 intelligence and endurance and 3 speed. Level 8 gets 2 intelligence, 1 luck, and 3 endurance. And level 9 gets 5 intelligence and endurance and 3 willpower. We have 32 strength, 81 intelligence, 53 willpower, 30 agility, 52 speed, 70 endurance, 40 personality, and 54 luck. We could use more strength for carry weight, and our low agility has harmed us more than I thought it would. It affects how often we're staggered and knocked down far more than in Oblivion. Of course, we could always use more intelligence, endurance, speed, and luck. Willpower has fallen by the wayside now that we have a 100% chance to cast most of our spells at full stamina. It feels odd for a mage to ignore willpower so quickly, but here we are. Without magicka regen, it doesn't do enough in my opinion. It doesn't even affect how fast we regain magicka while resting. Intelligence does. Not that it matters, we could take an in-game decade to meet Caius Cosades with no consequences, but it takes about a day to regen our magicka, which has led to comical amounts of time passing during intelligence grinds. Now, if we were using trainers, we'd need more willpower, as skills can't be trained above their governing attribute in Morrowind. However, magic skills are easy, albeit boring, to grind even at low skill with weak spells, so I rarely use trainers for them. I caught Ragnarok's retrospective review of Battlespire, an Elder Scrolls game I didn't even know existed, and while I won't spoil his video, I will say I found one of its mechanics interesting. In Battlespire, skills cannot be raised above their governing attribute by any means. Apparently this was also meant to be the case in Daggerfall, but was scrapped, possibly to avoid situations where a character's level could be soft-locked if all their class skills hit their attribute cap. So governing attributes in Daggerfall are just flavor text. I'm a little lost in Morrowind, and it feels like I discover something new about Oblivion every run, but I'll be completely clueless if we do Daggerfall runs. Anyway, while this governing attribute skill cap was described as disastrous in Battlespire by a Reddit post I found on the subject, I would love to see it implemented in a more flexible form to avoid soft locks in Daggerfall, Morrowind, and Oblivion. So having a low governing attribute relative to a skill would slow down XP gain for that skill, and having a high governing attribute relative to a skill would speed up XP gain. This character summary somehow swerved into a discussion about Elder Scrolls leveling systems. Would you all like to watch a video where I deep dive into the character creation and leveling systems in the Elder Scrolls, including Arena, Battlespire, and popular leveling mods? Although probably not Wraithguard because I don't think there even is proper character creation or leveling in it, and create my perfect hybrid of them. Because I could absolutely ramble about this, but we need to get back to the run at hand. We have decent magic skills. Oddly, Conjuration is our highest, despite being almost useless in combat for this run, because we used it to raise intelligence. I suppose we could switch to Bound Armor to save on weight, but we're already using Magicka for all our damage and most of our healing. 53 Destruction is enough to have a 100% chance of casting all our poison spells except Sunder Serpent, which is at 96% at full stamina. Restoration, Mysticism, and Alteration are in the mid-40s, which can reliably cast all their spells except the hardest like Levitate and Skeleton Key. Our heavy and medium armor skills are respectable at 51 and 45, but we only have a partial set of Iron and Bone molds, so we'll spend some gold on an upgrade. Before that, it's time to get the Minter's Ring from the Samari's Ancestral Tomb. It's near the starting town, so we could have gotten it earlier, but I was worried we'd run into poison-immune enemies like skeletons, so I waited until we could cast Sunder Serpent reliably. It's a good thing, too, because we ran into skeleton warriors and a Bone Lord. We were tanky enough to survive near them without leaning on health potions, but we were staggered a lot and occasionally knocked down, which caused some close calls. We had to cast Sunder Serpent 2 or 3 times per enemy. We couldn't rest in the tomb because enemies were too close by, and if we left, the enemies would respawn, so we had to drink a few Magicka potions to get through them all. Especially after Sunder Serpent failed twice in a row at close to full stamina. Oh, trust me to lose a 96% roll twice. I expect Magicka to be an ongoing problem, and unlike Oblivion, increasing our magic skills won't lower our spell's Magicka cost, so we may have to branch into Enchanting and Alchemy to alleviate it. For now, we claim the Mentor's Ring, which grants us 10 intelligence and willpower. Level 10 gets us 5 intelligence and endurance and 1 luck, and level 11 gets us another 5 intelligence, but only 2 endurance and strength because restoration increased at a bad time. Level 12 gets 2 strength and intelligence and 5 endurance. Grinding Conjuration has gotten very slow, so I think we'll just get a little intelligence from Alchemy over the next few levels until we max it out. Level 13 follows this plan with 5 endurance and 2 intelligence and strength again. More strength per level would be nice, but we made the easiest skill to grind for it, Acrobatics, a class skill, so it increases our level progress. This makes raising it faster as class skills gain more XP and we can easily snack a point in it while ticking our level over for 2 strength, but we can't stand around hopping until we get a 5 strength multiplier unless we've increased no other class skills that level. I think the benefits outweigh the drawbacks since we don't need strength for damage like a martial character. The extra carry weight is a convenience. Level 14 didn't get any endurance because I was sick of feeding our character to slaughterfish and bunny hopped through more fetch quests for the Imperial Cult instead, so we got 2 intelligence and speed and 3 strength. Level 15 got 3 strength and 2 intelligence and endurance as we hopped in a huge circle around Nissus. I have no idea why this region confuses me so much. I swear I follow the signs every time and I end up going in circles until I finally say screw it, look at the map, and beeline for Nissus cross-country. We just needed Muck Sponge for the Imperial Cult. Level 16 gets us 3 strength, a final point of intelligence, and 1 endurance. We could have gotten 2 speed instead, but we only needed 1 more endurance to reach 90, so we'll get 9 health per level. We've been working on several factions fetch quests, partly to give me something to do during the level grind, but also because we can skip part of the main quest if we have enough reputation. The Orc Legionnaires in Nissus were less stuck up than the soldiers in Fort Moonmoth that refused to tell us how to join the Legion. and they finally told us we could join the Legion at Fort Buckmoth. On our way there, we got roped into escorting this lady to Ghostgate, and one of the mini quests we've been slowly working on as we pass by is the temple pilgrimages, so I figured we could get the Ghostgate one out of the way. Of course, when we got there, I realized I'd forgotten to bring a soul gem as an offering because I hadn't been planning on visiting Ghostgate when we set off. Well, there are several merchants at the temple at Ghostgate. Surely one of them sells soul gems, right? No, silly. Why would you think that? I always get a sinking feeling when I Google something like, where are the nearest soul gems to Ghostgate? And the first result is a mod to add a soul gem merchant there. To the dev who decided not to put soul gems on the merchants at Ghostgate, go trip over a floating paintbrush. Level 17 gets us 2 endurance and strength and 1 luck. Now that we've maxed intelligence, leveling won't get us much other than health. Willpower and luck will improve our casting chance, and strength gives us carry weight, but that's it. And a restore stamina enchantment would help our casting more, as running around leaves us chronically exhausted, so I won't mention further level ups. Magicka is the only other big issue we're having. Sadly, we can't restore Magicka with enchantments, so our options are Magicka or Intelligence Fortifications for a larger Magicka pool, or Spell Absorption to absorb Magicka from enemy spells. However, Spell Absorption in Morrowind works differently than in later games. Each source of spell absorption we have doesn't stack up to 100%. Instead, each one is rolled individually, so 2 25% spell absorption effects don't equal a 50% absorption chance. It's about a 44% chance. The end result is that a bunch of small spell absorption effects are less effective, so we'd be better off looking for unique items with stronger effects like the Staff of Magnus. I've skipped over a bunch of fetch quests that involved little or no combat as they were unaffected by our rules. Now we're reaching later Mages Guild and Imperial Cult quests where we have to fight powerful mages in Daedra. And also wander around looking for a Staff of Shaming the quest says is to the east or west of Mount Cand, only to find out after an hour that it's actually south of Mount Cand. I support directions instead of quest markers most of the time, but stuff like this is why those of us who grew up on Oblivion and Skyrim fear Morrowind. At least the cave with the Staff of Magnus was nearby, and we found the other places with minimal fuss. We meander around the islands of Azura's coast looking for the cave with the Warlock's Ring for a bit, but it wasn't too bad. The foes guarding the Warlock's Ring and the Staff of Magnus were very similar. Mages in Daedra, mostly Frost Atronachs and 1 Storm Atronach. The mages inflicted a worrying amount of damage and had an annoying habit of absorbing or possibly reflecting our poison spells, but they were squishy so we were fine if we focused on them. If they stayed back and let their Atronachs pummel us while they cast spells, we would have been in trouble, but they kept running in. The Atronachs melee dealt some damage, but their opening volley of spells was far more dangerous. We don't have any resistances. And of course I didn't remember the ice cap we're carrying explicitly for its frost resistance until I was writing this part of the script. So we're vulnerable to non-physical attacks and have to lean on potions to tank through them. At least we had the Staff of Magnus' spell absorption to help us out while we were getting the Warlock's Ring. We needed it. We haven't improved our Magicka, and we lost several casts of Sunder's Serpent when we were knocked down. The Atronachs stagger us a lot and can knock us down, but their attacks are slow so we could cast between attacks. Not so with Dremora. Our low agility is likely biting us, and I admit I didn't factor in losing Magicka to knockdowns when I blew agility off. See, we can't cast while staggered, but it doesn't interrupt spells we're in the middle of casting. Knockdowns, on the other hand, do interrupt spells we're casting. Magicka is consumed at the start of the cast, and none of it is refunded if the spell fizzles for any reason, so our Magicka problems were greatly aggravated. If we hadn't been hoarding potions from the Mages Guild supply chest, we would have been in quite a pickle. We can't use the Warlock's Ring due to its reflect effect, but retrieving it got us a reputation point, and we may sell it to pay for enchantments. We also fought a group of smugglers during the final Shrine Sergeant Imperial Cult quest that I would have skipped, except the Wraithguard and mage near the entrance of the cave put up a solid fight. I remembered Wraithguards have poison resistance about halfway through, which goes a long way towards explaining the struggle. We also found 3 grand soul gems in random crates and barrels scattered around their cave. Morrowind's loot tables are less bonkers than later games, but some of it is clearly leveled. Not complaining though. We found a golden saint to fill one of the gems while we were wandering around Azura's coast, so let's see what we can make with it. Our main issues are chronic physical and mental exhaustion. Relatable, but unlike real life, we can fix it. As I said earlier, we can't regenerate magicka with enchantments, but we can fortify our intelligence for a larger magicka pool, regen stamina for fewer failed spells, and fewer staggers and knockdowns, I think? Or regen health so we spend less magicka healing, especially when we're between fights but nearby enemies prevent us from resting. Poison is worth considering too, since enchanted items recharge in real time even though we don't. On one hand, this makes me more likely to use on-cast and, in other runs at least, on-strike enchantments, as it removes their constant need for soul gems. But on the other hand, it kinda makes small gems worthless provided the items are given time between battles to recharge, which is basically guaranteed in our case since we have to rest to regain our magicka so often. We have extravagant rings. This is important because the item being enchanted matters in Morrowind. Generally speaking, more expensive items hold more magic. Exquisite items are even better, but I'll take extravagant since it's all we found and I don't feel like visiting shops. With what we currently have, we can make a poison spell roughly on par with Sting as a backup, or get 1 to 3 health and 1 stamina regen per second. The health regen will fluctuate each time we enter a new area. I think we'd need more stamina regen to offset the cost of running, especially since we tend to have high encumbrance. But this is the only combination of health and stamina regen that fully utilizes the capacity of an extravagant ring. At least if we put them in the right order. I'm not getting into the math, it's on screen if you're interested. The short version is additional effects get increasingly more expensive. The order they're added matters, and I can never remember what order to put them in, so I fiddle with it until I find the cheapest. Strong single effect enchantments are preferable because of this, but we can't get 4 health per second on this ring, so we may as well use the rest of the capacity on something. I'm actually okay with an incentive for wearing different items with strong, simple enchantments. I just wish the cost was the same regardless of the effect order. That's what confused us, Bethesda. You didn't have to get rid of multi-effect enchantments altogether. I also like item capacity. It makes sense to me that some materials hold magic better than others, but that got yeeted in later games too, so go ahead and shove a grand soul into a copper ring, I guess. Anyway, we can't afford to have any enchanters make this for us yet, and we have a precisely 0% chance of doing it ourselves. We could fortify our enchanting luck or intelligence to enchant it ourselves, but fortifying enchant is far more effective than fortifying intelligence or luck, and getting a fortify skill spell requires detouring to Solstheim or Mournhold. I settled on Solstheim because there's a unique robe there that'll improve our magicka, but just reaching the Skull Village is an ordeal. Overworld enemies on Solstheim are more threatening than those on Vardenfell, where we only have to worry about cliff racers, Nyx hounds, rats, and slaughterfish. Even less common creatures can be defeated with 1 to 4 casts of Sting, and ones that are resistant to poison, like Undead and Daedra, are confined to tombs or near shrines. On Solstheim, however, the only enemies that we can easily beat are wolves. Bears take nearly all our magicka, and humanoid enemies vary. The frost hags are a boon if we get spell absorption from the Staff of Magnus, but are dangerous if we don't. Boars are immune to poison, so we have to use Sunder Serpent, but we can slay the wild ones without consumables. It's written by Reeklings reflect spells because I guess the devs who made the Blood Moon expansion were fed up with mages breaking the game, so if we see Reeklings, we run. Spriggans are another screw this, I'm out encounter because they are tanky. Taking one out the first time takes nearly all our magicka, and unlike later games, they revive twice. The cherry on top of this shit sundae is they get stronger each time. We haven't run into Draugr yet. I assume they're immune to poison, but they tend to stick to Nordic tombs, and I don't plan on entering any. Unfortunately, most of the Skull refuse to talk until we complete part of the Blood Moon questline back in Fort Frostmoth. I always forget because it's such an asinine restriction that my brain deletes the information. So no fortify skill spells for us, at least for now. And yes, we tried stripping to see if we could get past their automatic goodbye, we don't want to deal with you outsider dialogue, with the why are you not wearing clothes dialogue, but that sadly did not work. We'll just pay one of the Mages Guild enchanters for our health and stamina regen ring. At least we can get our gold back by selling the handful of ebony and glass weapons we found to the enchanter. We at least get the robe I mentioned, the Mantle of Woe, as the quest giver is the only skull that'll give us the time of day. I guess he's so distraught over his son falling into the well that he's willing to overlook the skull obligation to be antisocial. We climb down into the well and find a bunch of skeleton berserkers. Thankfully, we've upgraded to a mix of Imperial, Orcish, Dreg, and Steel armor, and have decent-ish health, so we can tank them with a little help from potions. However, it takes 3 or 4 casts of Sunder Serpent per skeleton, so we have to chug a lot of magicka potions, most of which were from the Mages Guild supply chests. We've been able to make our own health potions, but there aren't many cheap magicka restoring ingredients, so our Mages Guild membership has been coming in clutch. Once the skeletons stop fighting, we talk down the Wayward Son and he gives us the Mantle of Woe so we can destroy it. Yes, we will absolutely do that, don't worry. The mantle wrecks our personality when worn, as it presumably turns us into a mwahahaing maniac, but we can simply remove it whenever we have to talk to people. The weakness to normal weapons also isn't a huge deal. The most annoying downside by far is the sun damage, but we can remove the robe when outside during the day. In exchange, we get extra conjuration and, more importantly, 5 extra magicka per intelligence. That's already 550 magicka with our maxed intelligence and the Mentor's Ring, and it could be even more with additional intelligence fortifications. We're still working on getting enough reputation to skip the later parts of the main quest. We need 50. The main quest we have to complete up to the point we can skip will get us 11, and saving the sleepers can get us up to 15 more, bringing us to 26. But we still need at least 24 reputation from other sources. We've done several Mages Guild and Imperial Cult quests, as well as a few Temple and Telvanni ones, but only the later quests in most quest lines grant reputation, so we haven't gotten 20 yet. The good news is most quests left in those quest lines grant reputation, so we should reach our goal soon. The bad news is I probably could have cut one of these factions entirely and saved a lot of time. Or, completed the main quest normally and possibly been done already, but we're this far in. I'm just glad we dropped the Fighters Guild and Imperial Legion early on because they only grant 1 point of reputation between them. The last few Imperial Cult quests give lots of reputation, and if we're lucky we'll run into Golden Saints to Soul Trap for Enchanting. We found scrolls to summon Golden Saints, but I decided against using them as allowing a summon to be useful in any way beyond conjuration grinding felt against the spirit of the run. They would also likely do damage to us in the process, which is explicitly against the rules. Anyway, the trickiest part of the last few Imperial Cult quests is finding the artifact locations. The Ring of Wind quest sat in our journal for a while because the directions said it was in a cave west of Telerun, and we didn't know where Telerun was. It was part of the reason we joined House Telvanni. Places with Tel at the start of the name are Telvanni settlements, and I figured someone would send us to Telerun so we'd have some idea of where to go, but nope. I eventually realized the quest had a second route to the cave starting from a Daedric ruin I won't attempt to pronounce the name of. It had marked for us. But you know what it could have mentioned instead of Telerun to begin with? Sadrith Mora, a much larger settlement with fast travel points that's a quest hub for the Telvanni and Mages Guild, and is only slightly further west of the cave. I swear, I prefer directions to quest markers, but for the love of the divines, think about the locations used to orient the player. They don't help if the player doesn't know where they are. Mark all locations given in the directions, or have maps available for purchase at bookstores that mark locations on the map like Kenshi does. I also miss the different markers for different types of locations. That was a hands-down upgrade in the later games, and I also like that nearby markers appear on the compass in those. I think those two changes and a smidge of care when writing directions I haven't forgiven the outright lie about the location of the Staff of Shaming, would have cleared up most of the confusion without resorting to quest markers. Once we find the cave, claiming the ring is trivial. We're facing smugglers, and a Wraithguard is the only one that gives us trouble. The next Imperial cult location is easier to find. The directions tell us it's south of Nissus, and you can almost see it from the Silstride. We're facing Daedra though, so the combat is harder. We have to use Sunder Serpent to get decent damage, but with the help of the Mantle of Woe, we have enough magicka to clear each floor of the stronghold, allowing us to rest and regain our magicka without using too many potions. The Winged Twilights reflect some spells back at us, forcing us to break out the health potions. Poison resistance would have been useful in this very specific circumstance, but we got by without it. Sadly, we didn't find any Golden Saints, but we fought Dremora Lords that dropped Ebony and Daedric weapons, which will fund our enchantments once we have souls. Of course, the Telvanni have things for us to do too. Once we're past the obligatory slew of fetch quests, we're sent to defend a couple Telvanni strongholds against invaders from other great houses. In reality, the real threats are the Daedra and Undead that are presumably Telvanni minions. The Skeleton Champions are a tanky nuisance, and the Bone Lord's spells are a threat if we don't absorb them with the Staff of Magnus. The other house's soldiers barely even register. They don't appear to have scaled at all. Random bandits having glass, ebony, or even Daedric gear in Oblivion is jarring, but invaders from rival great houses could surely afford steel at the very least. We have trouble managing our magicka as the strongholds are a bit bigger than the dungeons the Imperial cult artifacts were in, and they're laid out in such a way that even if we've cleared a room, enemies in a nearby room that's like wound behind it through a weird hallway prevent us from resting. While I play mages whenever possible, most of my time in Morrowind outside of challenges was modded. The most relevant being a real-time magicka regen mod based on willpower, similar to Oblivion. Without that, it feels best to use spells for buffs and enchantments or weapons for damage, because damaging spells burn magicka like crazy. I'm sure the poison restriction is exacerbating the issue, but even without it, magicka would be a problem. Please let me know if there's anything other than playing a high elf for more intelligence scaling or more intelligence enchantments that I'm missing. We finally have 26 reputation, which should be enough to reach 50 with the parts of the main quest we have to do if we rescue all the sleepers, so it's finally time to meet Caius Cosades after we've been in Morrowind for over an in-game year. His first few orders mostly involve talking to people. There are a few smugglers between us and the puzzle cube, but I remembered where it was so we didn't blunder into the automatons deeper in the ruins. The smugglers weren't much of an obstacle, which is fair. A high-level character shouldn't have trouble with random bandits. There were also undead we had to deal with to fetch a skull for an informant in the Mages Guild who's definitely not a necromancer. My only nitpick is that our rank in the Mages Guild isn't acknowledged. I suspect we'd be ordered around like a dull-witted apprentice even if we were the Archmage, but I guess the devs didn't plan for the main quest to be put off this long. The undead were far weaker than the ones we've encountered in other areas, so I assume they aren't scaled either. Even weak skeletons are immune to poison though, so Sunder Serpent was necessary. Although if weakness to poison were off the table, we could have run past them. After that, we visited informants in Vivec to learn more about the 6th house and the Nerevarine cult, which required disposition checks we easily passed by fortifying our personality. Charm would have worked too, but we're far better at restoration than illusion, so fortify spells are easier to cast. With that, we're sent to the Urshulaku camp and put through their initiation rite. This is the first part of the main quest I think would be a sticking point without weakness to poison. For one, there are lots of skeletons even if we stick to the shortest route to the bow we have to fetch, and they're champions, so I'd say these ones scale. Thankfully, our health, armor, and regeneration enchantments allow us to tank groups without leaning on potions, and the Mantle of Woe plus our new ring that gives us 1 to 47 intelligence, replacing the 10 intelligence from the Mentor's ring, give us enough magicka to clear each part of the cave before needing a rest. Oddly, fortify effects don't re-roll between areas like restore effects do, so we don't have to worry about our intelligence fluctuating every time we go through a door. We could have run past the skeletons if weakness to poison wasn't allowed, but the bow is carried by a ghost, which obviously is also poison immune. Maybe we could have pickpocketed. I confess I've never pickpocketed anything in Morrowind because without patches, it has at best a 56% chance of success. The guides I've found advise using damage fatigue, calm, or command to work around this, but if weakness to poison weren't allowed, those would certainly be banned as well. Maybe we'll do a stealth-only run where I'll give pickpocketing quest items from enemies a whirl, but for now, Sunder Serpent's weakness to poison allows us to banish the ghost and claim the bow. Next, we have to investigate a 6th house base in a cave near Narmok to eliminate its leader, Dagoth Gers. While Dreamers and Ash Zombies only require a couple casts of Sting, the Ash Ghouls, Ascended Sleepers, and Dagoth Gers no powerful spells. Their melee attacks are nothing to sneeze at either, and while we've been slowly improving agility by equipping a glass shield to passively grind light armor and block, we can block, but only while we don't have our hands up to cast, which is why we sometimes lower our hands while waiting for our poison spells to do their thing. Our agility is still only around 40, so we're staggered and knocked down often. They're also tanky. I'm not sure if they're resistant to poison. They aren't immune, as Sting did damage and it inflicts no poison weakness, but it struggled to outpace the health regen some of them had, so Sunder Serpent worked better. We had to fall back on health potions a couple times, usually when we had Sunder Serpents reflected back at us. Many more enemies in Morrowind reflect spells than in later games, adding risk to glass cannon mage builds. But our magicka held up. I'd certainly hope it would, considering we have over 1100, and we still had to rest between each section of the cave. Their spells didn't seem to give us much magicka when we absorbed them with the Staff of Magnus. I'm not sure if the 6th house casters have lower cost spells, or if most pre-made spells simply don't cost enough magicka to significantly move our magicka bar. Regardless, absorb spells didn't hurt us, so it still helped. Dagoth Gers curses us with Corpus, a divine disease originating from Dagoth the leader of the 6th house, that is considered incurable. It improves strength and endurance, which can be exploited to permanently raise strength and endurance above 100, but we won't bother with that this time. Of course, it also comes with crippling mental effects, and people don't want to talk to us unless they have very high disposition as they fear catching Corpus, so we need to cure it. This involves a lot of talking. Some of it is interesting, especially the conversation with the last living dwarf, but there's no combat beyond vermin like rats and cliff racers while traveling. The Corpus Beasts and the Corpusarium are easy to run past, and the next quest to break an informant out of the temple encourages us to avoid killing ordinators so we don't lose sympathizers within the temple, so no combat there either. Although I accidentally unequipped our intelligence ring when putting on a Murdrum ring to turn invisible, so I had to re-equip our intelligence ring several times to get another good fortification roll. Since those quests weren't affected by the challenge, let's skip ahead. We have to raid the 6th house stronghold of Kolgrun to prove we're worthy of even learning what the 3rd trial of the Nerevarine is to the Urshalaku leader, Sul-Matul. We must bring him Corpus Weepings, a 6th house cup, and the Shadow Shield as proof. If it weren't for the shield, this would be easy. Corpus Weepings can be obtained from weaker Corpus Beasts, and the cup is in a side chamber near the entrance. It's easy to miss if you take the main path through the stronghold, and I wish there were a couple more cups in other rooms to avoid that confusion, but now that I know where it isn't a problem. The shield, however, is all the way at the bottom of the stronghold near the ash vampire that leads this group of the 6th house, so we end up going through the whole place looking for it. There are a lot of ash ghouls and ascended sleepers here, and we have to lean on health potions a couple times thanks to their spells and spell reflection, but we recently enchanted an extravagant amulet with health and stamina regen, so outside of heavy magic barrages, we don't have much to worry about. We have to rest after clearing each zone, but our magicka holds up. The ash vampire at the end hit hard, but oddly didn't seem resistant to poison, so we did decent damage. We return with Weepings, the Shadow Shield, and the cup, and Sul-Matul tells us a riddle that's meant to lead us to the Cavern of the Incarnate, so we can claim Nerevar's Ring of Moon and Star. And yes, I looked up the location of the cavern because I'd like to get the run out this week. After After we return with the ring, Sulmatul declares us the Nerevarine and tells us the 4th and 5th trial are to get declared the Nerevarine by the other Ashlander tribes and the Hortator by the Great Houses. However, this can be skipped if we have 50 reputation. We also must be above level 20, but we met that requirement a long while ago, so it's time to get the remaining reputation by clearing out other 6th house refuges to free sleepers from Dagoth-Ur. We only had to clear out Hisor, a cave in the Foyada between Pelagrad and Balmora, and Asamanu, a cave west of the Hlalu canton of Vivek, to reach 50 reputation because those two control the majority of the sleepers. Oddly, Hisor affects a sleeper all the way up in Telarune. I'm sure editing Luna is showing them during this ramble, but we've already covered 2 6th house strongholds, and if anything, these ones are easier, so moving on. We must speak to the Urshulaku Wise Woman to receive a summons from the leader of the temple, Tolar Saroni, who in turn tells us Vivek summons us. And yes, we must speak to Tolar. If we head straight to Vivek, he tells us to bugger off. This is a minor annoyance since someone at Bethesda forgot to unlock the door to Tolar's office with the Nerevarine is summoned due to high reputation instead of completing the 4th and 5th trials, forcing us to break in. If there was only one way into his office, this would be a problem as the main door in the High Fane is watched by an Ordinator and another temple member at all times, but there's another door in the Hall of Wisdom that isn't guarded, so we were able to get in that way. From there, we're sent to Vivek, who gives us Wraithguard and tells us how to defeat Dagoth-Ur with Sunder and Keening, and also where to find Sunder and Keening, in 2 citadels on Red Mountain controlled by ash vampires. So our next order of business is claiming those. Keening isn't hard to get. We levitate over the ghost fence to Odrassil, bypass an easy lock with magic, climb up a ladder, and find Keening unguarded. Sunder is carried by the Ash Vampire in Vemnal, but we've been chewing through the 6th house, so we were rarely in danger. To be honest, my stinginess with the healing potions was likely the biggest threat. Now that we have Sunder and Keening, we have to reach the heart of Lorkhan and destroy it. Or more accurately, make it go dormant for a bit. I very much doubt it can be destroyed. I suspect what we're actually destroying is the enchantments that have been placed on the heart. Hitting it a few times will stop Dagoth-Ur, and that's what we care about. We have to get past more 6th house cultists in Dagoth-Ur's citadel, including another ash vampire, but let's skip to the main event. Dagoth-Ur hits hard, but his spells are the main threat. They damage all our attributes and leave us over-encumbered because my loot goblins wouldn't shut up even though it was the end of the run, so we're carrying a ton of loot. We spent the first battle against Dagoth-Ur locked in place by our own greed, but he kept moving into melee range between spells so we could reach him with Sunder Serpent. That wouldn't work for the second fight in the Heart Chamber. Our target was the heart, not Dagoth-Ur, so we dove off the ledge, started levitating partway down, and floated towards the heart. Unfortunately, our levitation spell isn't very strong, so we're floating slowly and got winged by one of the many incoming fireballs, but we restore our strength and push through it. We also patch up our agility because it's time to smack the heart with Sunder and Keening and deal with melee attack rolls for the first and only time in the run. Our short blade and blunt skills are pitiful and our agility is only around 40, so we're in absolute butterfingers with any weapon. But thankfully, someone on the dev team planned for this and gave Sunder and Keening a fortify attack effect on their enchantments, making them more accurate. We only equipped Wraithguard as we neared the heart despite its defensive bonuses because its reflect effect would have broken the rules whenever enemies hit us. However, now that we need it to protect us from the mortal wound script attached to Sunder and Keening, it's allowed. There are ways around this. Speedrunners fortify their health to crazy levels, although we'd still have to use Sunder and Keening. NPCs aren't affected by the script, so if we used command spells to bring one along, they could destroy the heart for us, allowing us to avoid dealing non-poison damage altogether. But to be completely honest, if every rule set that forbids Sunder or Keening required me to babysit an NPC through Red Mountain and this battle, I'd avoid Morrowind runs altogether. So allowing Sunder and Keening was a compromise. As for the rest of the run, I was surprised by how little our poison obsession affected us. The cure poison effect the wiki was worried about barely came up. I think 1 or 2 smugglers may have had cure poison potions they used, but all we had to do was poison them again. It's not like Diablo where antidotes buff poison resistance for a while. Sure, relying purely on spells for damage ate our magicka alive, especially before we got the Mantle of Woe, but that would be the case regardless of the damage type we chose. And if the Mantle of Woe and an intelligence ring hadn't solved the problem, we could have used poison enchantments. Things would have been a bit more interesting if non-damaging debuffs like weakness to poison had been banned, but it wouldn't have affected us as much as you might think. Other than that bow carried by a ghost, there weren't any poison-immune enemies that had to be eliminated for a main quest. None of the 6 house cultists are poison-immune. Dagoth himself has defensive spells for every damage type except poison and raw magic. So if we could pickpocket that bow or get something else to banish the ghost for us, we could beat the game with all other damage types and debuffs banned. There are also alternate ways of completing the main quest, either beating Vivek and having Yogrim, the last living dwarf, jury-rig Wraithguard, or fortifying our health and tanking the mortal wounds from Sunder and Keening. But I want to beat the main quest the intended way during these runs whenever possible. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that run. If you did, then please consider subscribing and leaving a like if you haven't already. It really helps the channel. And if you want something else to watch, the playlist with all my runs is on your screen now, along with another video of mine YouTube thinks you'll like. Channel memberships are also a thing if you want to support the channel directly, get your name in the credits at the start of challenges, and get access to new runs as soon as they're uploaded, usually a few days before they're public. I also have a Blue Sky where I post as new runs go up, so follow me there if you want to make sure you see them. I have a few more ideas for Morrowind, so I might do another run in it, or at least put a poll including it up soon, but the next run is going to be another Dragon Age Origins one, and it isn't a solo run this time. Also, the Grim Dawn with no masteries run, for those of you who are interested, I have been making progress on it. In fact, part of the reason it took so long for this Morrowind run to come out is because I was also working a lot on the Grim Dawn one. So progress is happening on it. It's still going to be a bit, but it's happening.